like it over there.
Yeah, okay. Nobody.
For sure you can
Exactly.
do it.
He's right over there, and
You
he's
very rarely talk to me, and that's good.
that's good. He's.
Well, I'm going to throw more stuff your way.
We expect him to be the anchor down there.
Okay.
Mumble
Thank you.
and do anything I want.
I can. Are you? I can.
I've got to go vote right after this.
Pretty.
Maury went right at 7.
And we'll be back, yeah, before the end of this year.
37 or 37. I'm not the raising on.
For voting?
Maury this morning.
There's going to be a low voter turnout, but
Yeah. Well, I think there's some areas
I'm
that.
interested to see how some of the races come out. I
Yeah,
usually
oh,
don't get
yeah.
excited, but
Oh, I think it'll be very nationally as well as.
oh, nationally, I think it's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
You know, like Republicans or not, or whatever, it's never good to have. It's never good to have. But we need a third party. That's what we really need. We really need a third party.
Well, a viable.
Third party.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Well, that's not really a party. I mean, there's no platform. I mean, they just have
Well, they
an
may have
agenda.
to get to be one if the Republicans
I
feel
hope
like they
not.
don't.
I really hope that I like their 10 ideals, but I don't like the religious undertones and some of the other stuff that goes along with it. I mean, I think we all want to balance the
Well,
budget.
it's just the raw negativity of it that
Exactly.
is very
Can't do anything in front.
turns a lot of people off. It turns a lot of
There's a
people.
lot of big money behind it, which scares people. But
Yeah.
big money people are also conservative people who have learned how to balance budgets, and they have a hard time understanding how the government lives on this thing. I mean, I was talking to somebody about the river the other day, and I said, if you could give me a commitment from 10% of the businesses you claim to be along with,
you say, John?
Even 10%, and show me one federal dollar that's been promised. I'll maybe look into your opinion. I started with 30%. I said, even give me 10. And they go, well, that's not how we do it. And I said, are you kidding me? Of course that's not how you do it, because you're using public money. If you were opening a mall or something, it was a for-profit enterprise, you'd have over 50%. I mean, how can you assume that all these people are going to expect taxpayers to put the bill for $76 million with no guarantee that he's going to come?
27.
No, for the first step.
That's right.
They overshot. They should have just stuck with 6 and cleaned the river out. That should have been it. We'll see. We'll know tonight. And it'll be interesting. If they do.
I'm afraid of that too.
If they build it and support it.
I mean, people have worked pretty darn hard.
Yes, they have. They put a lot of time in it.
Yeah.
And money.
Okay, we'll go ahead and call the November 2nd, 2010 meeting of the Salina Planning Commission to order. I hope you all voted today. It's not a requisite for being here, just a suggestion.
That's right.
Okay, item number 1 on the agenda
Put it
is
twice.
approval of the summary minutes of the regular meeting held on October 19th, 2010.
I move we approve.
Is there a second? Been moved and seconded to approve the summary minutes from the regular meeting held October 19th, 2010. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None being heard, motion carries. Application PDD 10-3/3A filed by Warren Ediger, requesting approval of a preliminary development plan and a change in zoning district classification from R2 multifamily residential to R3 multifamily residential to PDD Planned Development District to allow construction of a new children's center at the southwest corner of Oakdale Avenue and Ash Street. Subject property is legally described of all of lots 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 10, and Lot 8 except the south 50 feet of the east 50 feet thereof in the Atherton Phillips edition of the City of Salina, Saline County, Kansas, and the west 90 feet of Lot 24, Surveyor's Plot G, City of Salina, Saline County, Kansas, and addressed as 155 North Oakdale Avenue. Dean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're excited to bring this project to you for your review and consideration. This particular area that we're talking about is in an identified special redevelopment area of the city, which is an area that's basically located north of Iron and State Street, and it's an area where building permit fees are waived as an incentive to try to encourage new investment and development. And just from our tracking and record keeping, we haven't had too many opportunities to bring forward applications either to you or administratively that involves a project north of Iron and State Street. So this is one, and we're excited to have the opportunity to give you the information about it. The area that we're dealing with has a pretty antiquated platting pattern, and you can see from some of the dates in there, the Atherton Phillips edition was done in 1906, and Surveyor's Plat G was platted shortly thereafter in 1912. what is the former St. John's Hospital that's to the west of this site. The construction on that began in 1913, and it was almost an afterthought, as you can probably see by driving on it, but the right-of-way for Oakdale Avenue in this block wasn't established until 1918, because neither of the original plats took into account right-of-way for Oakdale Avenue connection between Johnstown and Ash. The proposal that we have is dealing with a block that is bounded, first of all, on the west by Front Street, on the north by Ash Street, on the east by Oakdale Avenue, and on the south by Johnstown Avenue. Historically, this area was developed with smaller single-family homes. And our first major change in this area was the Johnstown Towers. Those were constructed in 1977. Shortly after that, the what was then St. John's Hospital began buying up homes and removing homes on the west side of Oakdale, and additional parking was constructed there. And then the Salina Regional Health Center relocated a child care center that was at the corner of 5th and South Street to 634 East Ash in 1998. And the other important feature of this property here is the original platting for this area had a 17-foot wide alley right-of-way for a mid-block alley that connects Front Street with Oakdale. And this alley has been used for rear access to properties, including access to Johnstown Towers parking. It's been used for trash collection and for just general access to parking lots in the area. This alley also serves as a conduit for overhead and underground utilities. And as you can see from the plan that you have in front of me, a portion of this facility would be located over that alley right-of-way. So last week on the 25th, the City Commission had an initial public hearing to consider vacating that alley, and they gave conceptual approval to that on first reading, subject to the conditions you see outlined on page 2 of your report. And so part of that would be that we're wanting to build over this portion of the alley, so it would basically terminate at this point. There would be an alternate alley that would come up, actually it would come up on the west side of the pump station through here, and that would provide an alternate access out to Ash Street, and also a conduit for utilities. So utilities that come down here today would be rerouted up through here and over to this intersection at that point. Westar Utilities indicated that they were in favor of the relocation and realignment, but requested that on this piece right here that a 10-foot utility easement be dedicated outside the alley. The alley needs to have 10 or 20 feet of drivable area, and they're going to be using underground cables, so they'll have those little green boxes along the way there, and those need to be located outside the alley, so they've requested that another 10 feet be provided along there. So it's our understanding, and the applicant's representative confirmed that they are close to having relocation agreements with all affected utilities, and that when those are confirmed, then the alley can be vacated in its entirety. But when we looked at this project initially, and you look at the unique mix of uses in one package or building, and the fact that we've got some site issues that are best addressed through a campus planning approach, the PDD process was recommended by planning staff. So we have a preliminary development plan for the Donna L. Veneer Children's Center, and again we're focusing on the southwest corner of Ash and Oakdale, and the project address for this would be 155 North Oakdale. So the request is both to rezone the property and to approve a campus plan. And the physical changes we described, which would be vacation of part of an alley, dedication of a new alley, and dedication of a new utility easement along the south side of Ash Street. So this is a planned development district, which means it's a customized approach to zoning and approving a plan. And so what it really means in shorthand is, if you think it's a good plan, then the plan controls rather than any underlying zoning rules. So if the zoning requires a 20-foot setback and a 15-foot one is proposed, but it's a good plan, then that is what controls. You're looking at the merits of the plan as opposed to how it fits into a particular slot within our zoning ordinance or our districts. So generally this is a two-step process where you have a preliminary plan and then a followed up more detailed final plan. But as we've looked at this and the amount of detail that we have, we think that can be addressed in one step as a combined preliminary and final. So we have reviewed this plan to determine compliance with city ordinances. You are to look at it and to transmit to the applicant here at the public hearing the degree to which you think this plan meets parking, signage, and landscaping regulations and policies of the city. And your choices today would be to recommend approval of the plan, approve the plan subject to certain revisions or conditions, or option 3 is essentially go back and rework this plan substantially. We didn't find any particularly areas where there was major variations or exceptions being requested, such as zero setbacks or excessive lot coverage or waivers of particular standards. There are a few things here that are unique, and I have a supplemental report for you up at your places there. So I would go through those in terms of you'll see different numbers about site coverage there, and so what you have, if you count the total campus, is 2.95 acres, but the area that's really to the west of the new north-south alley is 13,500 acres, so you subtract that out in terms of what's being developed now. But their lot coverage, even though it's a fairly large building, is still well within tolerances because they do have a large campus. You can see from the plan it's an L-shaped building with front entryways into the facility facing Oakdale and facing Ash. The architect can probably confirm that for us, but we were estimating 20 to 25 feet. It's a one-story building, but it's got a pretty pronounced pitch to the roof, and so total height to peak of roof in some locations would look close to 20 to 25 feet. Our required setbacks, if we were looking at the underlying R3, would be 25 feet from a front property line. They far exceed that, and 20 feet from any side property line. They comply with the front yard, but on the side yard, particularly the back side with the play areas, they've got 15 feet from Johnstown Towers on the west, and on the south adjacent to the alley they are slightly less than 20 feet. The other thing we'd call your attention to is the play areas will be enclosed by a fence which will extend out to the front property line, but given the type of fencing that's involved and the fact that it's a relatively open fence, it should actually enhance and not detract from the appearance of the facility. And I think if you've driven by the site, you've seen that unfortunately there are some existing mature trees that have been or are going to be removed. The contractors have worked with Steve Blue, the city forester, and what is savable, there'll be an attempt to retain mature shade trees where possible. If we look at off-street parking, there's quite a bit of existing asphalt that's west of Oakdale, and these are leftovers from the parking lots that served St. John's Hospital and then the Penn campus of Salina Regional Health Center. The plan is that all that existing asphalt would be removed and basically start over. Did want to point out that while they're building, the plan is to keep the existing child care center in operation and basically build around it. So that will be that last thing demolished, and the parking around there, there'll be a phasing to their construction. You've got a detailed parking analysis that we've inserted in the supplemental report. You could go to that, John, but basically we're dealing with 3 uses here. A child care center, the infant and child development operation, and then CAPS, which is primarily office use. And the architect for the project has given a breakdown for how he determined those parking needs. And the good thing about a planned development district is that you can look at the plan, you can consider the plan, you can look at the rationale provided by the project architect, and if in your judgment that works, then there's no additional second guessing or reworking that needs to be done. So the plan that you have in front of you has 82 marked spaces. We did want to point out that you can, in your attachments there, you can see that a portion of this building will have a basement under it, and in that basement are meeting and training rooms. And so these numbers are based on square footages that are on the first floor, and I think the applicant or architect can expand on that, but it's very likely that the public meeting rooms or training rooms would be used in the evening hours when the activity upstairs is low or non-existent. So it's not like we're trying to accommodate both full usage of both floors at the same time, so you can take that into account. If we're looking at our standard, which you're becoming familiar with our magic 32 square foot number, but when we look at the standard for churches, schools, nursing homes, things of that nature, or business professional offices, the ground sign is by district regulation limited to 32 square feet. We've got a sign over at the Kenwood Cove pool that's in the neighborhood of 58 square feet. That seems to work. That was done through a planned development district. That seems to be proportional and fit in there. And what they're proposing here is twin signs, one at the corner of Ash and Oakdale and one at the southeast corner near Jonestown and Oakdale. And by our calculation, those would be approximately 50 square foot signs. So again, through the planned development district, if you look at the signs, evaluate the site, and find those to be proportional, then through the PDD you can approve their sign plan. Architect has evaluated landscaping. This property actually has 3 front yards: Ash, Oakdale, and Johnstown. And when you take those reductions into account and look at the interior parking lot landscaping, then they actually exceed the city's minimum requirements. We don't have a detailed plan for plantings at this time, but you can certainly see that from a perspective of the site itself. And then the final thing we looked at or analyzed was the parking lot, and then traffic access and circulation. And so all the parking lot layout would be addressed and would meet all of our minimum requirements. So maybe, John, if we could go back to the very first, and we'll kind of walk through in terms of the subject of traffic, access, and circulation. Wanted to point out a couple things. First of all, we asked, and it was confirmed, that there's an existing driveway that was put in 1998 for the Child Care Center. This driveway is about 8 to 10 feet closer to the intersection than the existing drive. And going back and look at the Planning Commission discussions, when the existing Child Care Center went in here, there was no driveway here, and staff and the Planning Commission was trying to nudge that driveway as far west as possible, because it doesn't show in the picture here. John, maybe if you could go to the aerial photo and show us the north a little bit more. What you have is a situation where you've got 70 feet of right-of-way here for Oakdale, and at the bottom you have 70 feet of right-of-way, and here you have 45 feet of right-of-way, plus there's an 11-foot offset over here, so you've got this jog in Oakdale. And the primary concern is you have vehicles here, and if you have vehicles exiting here in close proximity, that can create some multiple movements that are potentially hazardous if you've got vehicles entering or leaving at the same time. So we wanted to call your attention to the fact that that driveway is, by our measurements, about 24 or 25 feet to the west of this, and in the planning and engineering staff's view, that is not ideal as far as the location. So if you could go back to the plan, John. So for traffic and circulation, we have an entrance here. As of now, no connection plan to this new north-south alley. We have an access aisle here, and then they've lined this driveway up here. So this, because of the alignment coming from the north and the close proximity here, we don't think that's ideal, and we don't know what it would do to the plan if we had to move over in this area and bring people in like that. Obviously it's not a straight alignment, but Mr. Stack and engineering and planning have a little bit of concern about how close that is to the intersection. The other thing that has been brought up, it was brought up in 1998, it's been brought up at different times, and I don't know if you want it, if you have a pointer there, Dan, or I can kind of walk through it, but we've gone through a couple exercises where we've tried to look at, is it possible to do something right out in here or right down in here where you take the hard edge off of this square curve here and try to make this a little smoother transition. And I don't know if we have a drawing or the best way to illustrate that. Do you have something to put up, Dan?
Yeah, John has something he can put up to show. It's a pretty good offset right now, and we don't feel I don't feel as strongly about the intersection at Ash because it's a stop condition. The intersection at Johnstown actually is a flow through, and so it's just awkward. I've been checking to see how many accidents we've had. We've had a few more at Ash than we have had at Johnstown, so maybe it's not a huge safety concern, but from a street perspective, just when you look at it, it would be nice to have a better curve on the south edge there. And we've tried to put in a curved center line, which would end up cutting a little bit of right-of-way or a little bit of the corner off of their property there to try and either make a larger curb radius or some way just to give people a better pass through that intersection. I don't know how many of y'all have driven that, but it's just awkward that you have to You have to really get over and make sure nobody's coming head on to you. I mean, it doesn't seem to be a major traffic accident problem, but it is something to consider.
I would almost concern that it would encourage them to go a little faster down that street, though.
That's
So
true.
maybe that'll slow them down, since it is going to be a child care center. Might be a little smarter to slow them down. And if we've had less accidents there, if it ain't broke, let's not fix it.
All right.
It's tax dollars at work.
So that is what we had in the way of traffic and circulation. Again, Ash is considered a minor arterial street. It has the biggest traffic flows, and then Oakdale and Johnstown would be considered as local streets with much lower traffic volumes. But again, we're looking at a total of 28,000 square feet with a basement, 3 primary users, which would be CAPS, infant development, and a child care center, which exists there already but would be reconfigured, and 82 parking spaces with the ability to go beyond that. So you have this in your packet, and this is the arrangement where the child care center would be here at that location, and then this is a blow up of the basement that shows meeting rooms, and that would be under this portion of the building. So just a couple of things that we've identified from a technical side for the project architect. One of those was the location of that Ash Street driveway in proximity to the intersection. The other is any interest in trying to soften or bend those angles a little bit at the 2 street intersections, but primarily with interest at Johnstown. With a basement and restrooms proposed in the basement, it looked like from a technical side that it would be a close fit looking at existing sewer depths and the basement depths. So we want to make sure that our staff wanted to make sure that the project architect pulled some information to make sure we're matching up the depth or elevation of the basement with the depth of existing sewer to make sure that we can get restrooms to the basement. The fire marshal was looking for clarification of where the fire lines and water connections for fire protection would be. The assumption is that since the water is on the north side up here at Ash, that any connection to the building would be there, but the fire marshal was looking at confirmation of that. So the other thing that comes into play here is the city has a water well right here, and there'll be a relocated raw water supply line that'll follow this alley and come over to the corner here. But there is sewer out here to the north and a water line to the north, and that's primarily how this facility will be connected to city services. So I think with that, I'd be open to any questions you have that we haven't covered related to this project, but we've tried to cover the design and layout, the appearance of the building itself. I think this is a elevation sketch, your perspective of what you'd see at the corner of Oakdale and Ash, and the building seems to be quite compatible with a mixed use or residential setting, which either way you look at it, and this is in a neighborhood where this type of investment could have a distinct positive influence. So we're quite impressed with the plan, and the only item that we identified from a traffic or circulation standpoint would be the proximity of the driveway to the intersection, and if there's any interest in looking at doing anything with the Oakdale alignment there. And again, the applicant would already be dedicating right-of-way for a new alley and an easement along the north, and I think in Mr. Stack's estimation that there would be a need for some additional right-of-way dedication down in that southwest corner to make that work. And the only thing that would most likely impact if you did anything here would be sliding that sign back. And I believe the fence line is going like this behind the sign. So we'd be open to any questions you have about site layout or the traffic and circulation. If not, then we should hear from the applicant and the architect.
Questions of staff?
The formula for parking needed of staff is 1 per 2 staff people,
For the child care center.
right?
Mhm.
And is that a standard formula for what?
Well, the formula for schools and the formula for child care is based on primarily on staffing, not on number of children. So it obviously under the state regulations, the more children you have, the higher staff ratios you can have. But I think that if you judge from the experience of their current operation, that area that they have that's asphalted there originally had 46 parking spaces. We determined that they needed 9 spaces total for the child care that's operating there now, and probably on a daily basis there's like 3 or 4 of those that are occupied during the course of the day, and then the rest of them are used by pickups and drop-offs that are at various times. But that is based on the anticipated staffing levels for the child care center.
I just wonder, what do you find in the school system? Does every other person not drive that's employed? Or do 80% of teachers drive, or?
I couldn't translate.
Cindy, I don't know. I can really answer that. I don't know that I've really studied that. I think you can always use as much parking as you can have, but we
Right.
seem to find
just
what we're
looked at a
doing
net.
seems to be working fairly well.
Yeah.
We have some areas where our schools have grown a little, and we have more staffing now, and we do need a little more parking. But I think the formula seems to be satisfactory. If it's the one they're applying here, it's worked for our schools fairly well.
I have a question for Mr. Stack. Do we have an idea what the traffic count is on either of those, actually all 3 of those roads?
Okay. It's about 4,000 on Oakdale and around 4,000 on Ash as well.
Any idea on Johnstown?
We don't have traffic counts on that one.
Okay. I guess what I'm getting at is well, I feel, if you feel that there's a need for a realignment of some of those streets, or by radiusing those corners a little bit more, I think, if we're going to do this project, if we have everything else going on, I think now's the time to do it. I guess I would need to know from you exactly how does radiusing that corner improve that. You're still going to be neck down in the middle there. How does the radiusing of that corner improve that situation?
It would just allow us to stripe a continuous curve where you can at least have a 12-foot lane that you can fit 2 cars as they. I think of a good way to show it. We'd have to probably figure out a way to show it, but it would just allow you to, instead of having 2 cars coming head on at each other, they would be able to be offset a little bit
separate.
more. It's just more of it's a bigger radius. They would be able to be offset enough to where they wouldn't be able to collide without crossing the center line.
Okay.
Maybe it'd be a way to look at it.
And that's 20 feet across there right now?
I think it's 45-foot right-of-way. I'm not sure how wide the road is. That's a good question. I think it's 28 feet normally is what they are.
It seems narrow when you're driving.
It seems narrow, yes. But I agree with Commissioner or Householder that I am looking for accidents, and I am surprised I do not see any there. So it doesn't seem to be a problem, but I drive it every day, and
I go down it every day, and I've never had a
awkward,
problem.
but
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to be a problem. So it's not something that. It's something that's been staff has brought up every time this has been to a question. I guess it's been brought up before. It's been brought up now, but there aren't any accidents to say that it's an issue. It just is an awkward intersection.
What would your an improved entrance on the corner of Oakdale and Ash there look like? Closer
It just needs to go further west. I guess, from what Dean tells me, there was considerable discussion regarding the one that's there now. So, I mean, it sounds like if they could put it back in the same place the one is now currently, that would be a start. Moving it closer to the intersection actually lines it up with the north side of Oakdale, north of Ash, which actually almost lines it up with the street coming north. So if somebody decided to go
Could
straight,
that be confusing to
yeah, it'll be
voters?
real confusing. But it depends on traffic volumes and how many people are going to be using that. They have 3 other entrances, or 3 total entrances and exits. So it depends on how many people use that. But it's not something we would encourage at this time because it's going to be awkward. It's going to be so. Moving it to the west would sure help. Now, how far is something we'll have to work with them on, because it's, there's already an existing driveway there that they could theoretically utilize if they wanted to.
I guess this would be a good time to ask Mr. Ediger to weigh in on this situation.
My name is Warren Ediger. I'm the architect for the project. My business address is 631 East Crawford, Suite 211. I think Dean has done a good job of presenting an overview of what the project looks like and what we're intending to do with it. I can start by addressing the site access issues, and then we can go on to other questions that you might have. What we trade off if we move the entrance along Ash farther west is we may shift some potential confusion from the street to internal confusion within the site. And I think we'd be looking at trading accidents from one location to the other. I don't know that we gain very much, especially where you have traffic that's where you're contending with people that are backing out of stalls and moving through and dropping off kids and so on. So the intent with this was to make the access as clear and direct through the site as possible, knowing that we've got young kids and people trying to negotiate the path through there. I'm not opposed to looking at an alternative for how to make that work better from a street standpoint and the alignment. It has shifted about, I think it's about 8 feet to the east of where the current curb cut is. If we'd move it back to the existing curb cut, we wouldn't reuse it. We'd actually reconfigure that and replace it. But again, that would pull it off of the alignment internal to the site. Again, if I can work with engineering and go through some alternatives with them and see what seems to work out for that. The other area that I'm concerned about is Johnstown and Oakdale intersection. In the course of working on this project, I've driven through that frequently, not daily like Dan has, but I have noticed that people take a fair amount of care going through that intersection, and it's because there is that offset and because it's a very clear and short radius on the street. I think if we make a more gentle curve to that, it's going to make that, in essence, a thoroughfare, and people are going to tend to speed through that intersection, and we'll probably be looking at traffic control in there. Again, it's one of those things where I think the people that use it the most have gotten accustomed to it, and that's probably why it's not a problem.
Could you explain how you and I'm sorry if I'm missing the apparent here, but explain how moving that to the west 8 feet would increase possibility for accidents and stuff. Could you go back to the previous slide, John?
John, if you can go back to the site plan.
You determine that 68 are required.
Okay, if we shift the drive back up into here, then people coming out of this are going to have to jog over as they come out, and then the people coming through here, instead of having it's about a 20-foot space in there to get themselves prepared to drive out on the street, now are turning into an area where you already have kind of it's a jog in the internal drive. You have almost a Y where two flows of traffic are going to meet.
What if it were just either an entrance or exit only onto Ash at that point, so that you don't have traffic coming and going? You eliminate about 50%. Say you make that an entrance off of Ash and an exit off of Oakdale. So a lot of times, for instance, in our schools, the streets kind of revert to during times when children are being let off or are picked up. The streets become kind of one way through there so that the traffic flows. It seems like you could, yeah, I don't,
The challenge with that is getting the people using it to remember that that's not a two-way entrance and exit out of it. I mean, you're always going to have the potential for people wanting to try and come and go through.
well, I understand that.
But the majority of the people that are using Salina Child Care will be there every day, morning and evening, and so they'll get trained to what the traffic pattern is, just like at a school that they do. The other thing is, though, I guess in comparing it to a school, we have a much lower population count here than what we do in school, and so while we are talking about a fair amount of traffic, it's still nothing compared to what a school location would see.
But for the size of the site, it's going to be something
Right.
similar in that there are certain times of the day where you're going to have most of your...
It peaks in the morning and in the evening.
Yeah.
Is city staff correct when we looked at this? We assumed because of the width that each of these 3 driveway openings was intended for two-way traffic. Is that?
Yes.
That's the plan, is they'd both serve as both entrances and exits. So there isn't necessarily a plan for circulation. I mean, we should anticipate two-way circulation all through the lot.
Dean, what about, I like the plan, I think it's a good plan, I think it's an excellent addition to the neighborhood. Is it possible if we would go ahead and approve this the way it was, and I completely agree with you, moving this over is just going to make a confusing parking lot. I don't even think that's even an option. Is there a way that we could look into if it doesn't work as a two-way, say all of a sudden there's a huge increase in accidents, which I do not foresee at all. I don't think that there will be any accidents based on this entrance, period. But if there was, could we come back and say, hey, we thought it would work both ways. Now we're only going to allow that to be either an entrance or exit, whatever we deem to be I mean, could we retro change that if we feel like it becomes a traffic issue? I say let him try. I don't think it's going to be a problem. But if for some reason I'm not the genius that I think I am, and this doesn't work out, could we go back and say, we've made a mistake and maybe this can only be an exit or an entrance, or...
Well, I'll let maybe Mr. Kennedy speak to that and whether they've run into that on any of their school projects where they found that they needed to post a sign or arrows or whatever to change a driveway to enforce a particular circulation if the first plan didn't work.
Yeah, the first plan didn't work very well at Lakewood, and we're not sure the plan we have now is working very well.
Yeah, that's probably not a good example.
I'm not so sure why you guys built a school there in the first place, but...
But it's not a bad location for the school. The driveways aren't quite working out. But we've had issues with others where we've just merely posted exit and entrances, and it's worked fairly well. People get used to it fairly quickly.
Is that maybe a more workable idea than...
My bigger question to that, and ties into what you're saying, Aaron, is that would it be appropriate to look at some easement dedication now, should this become a problem later on with Oakdale being the problem with the radiuses? If you have an easement dedication now, then the city could go in there and make some changes. If you don't have it, then it becomes a problem because the developers developed in it and so forth, and then it's harder to get the land acquired. So to put the radiuses on, the problem with the radius at Ash then is if you allow that drive to be where it's at, you won't have any space for a radius later on.
Right.
Would you?
I have a hard time understanding how we gain anything by a wider radius at that.
I don't know that you do, but
because that's based on a turn off of Ash onto Oakdale, and making it wider just seems like a problematic thing to do.
It may not. The only comparison I have to think of, and I'm trying to imagine, is I think it's Walnut and 9th. Those two streets don't line up, and that is awkward. I mean, it really feels awkward. And is this a similar situation?
It's similar, but it's there just isn't the volume of traffic here nor the accidents to really warrant anything at Ash. Since it's a stop condition, there hasn't been a major issue there.
Didn't answer your question. Yes, traffic signs are easy to put up later, and exit and entrance signs are pretty straightforward.
That's the easiest retrofit if it determined that it's not working.
Yeah. I think we sometimes tend to overthink this stuff through and try and estimate what's going to happen. I think going off the information we have, which is there aren't any more accidents here than anywhere else, Salina has learned to deal with it. I think we go around try screwing things up, we're going to add accidents. We're going to change how people are used to thinking. And like I agree with Warren, and I think I said before, as we curve that street there on Johnstown, we're encouraging faster traffic flow. And so I think it's a good plan. The layout for the parking lot works well. We don't have a history of accidents there. Let's not over-guess what we think. I mean, I know it's our job to look ahead and think how this is going to affect this, but I just don't think we're going to have the traffic that maybe we're thinking of out of this building here, and we're maybe overthinking this a little too far and not focusing on what we should be focusing on.
As far as the site plan, the other thing I wanted to point out is that if you compare the existing plan or the survey that's included with it compared to this, we've substantially reduced the number of curb cuts along all of the streets there so that we have only 3 entry points instead of what probably are 6 or 7 now.
True.
On your
Little
rendering
perspective.
here, yeah, the sign says, you know, the Donna L. Vanier Children's Center. How will people know what agencies are actually there?
Each agency will have a primary entrance in the building, and so at those primary entrances on the building itself or on a small sign setting in front of it, we'll have an identifier for the agency. As far as the identification of the site, we'll have the 2 signs similar to the one that you see in that.
Well, I guess it surprises me that you need a 50 square foot sign then.
We haven't
Two of them.
finalized the proportions of
Okay.
that. What we were working with was the original graphics that were developed for that logo, and in working with those proportions, it is a large sign, and I
Yeah.
think we have an intent to reduce it
Yeah.
if we can.
I just think for the
The-
neighborhood,
Yeah.
I think even if you would put 3, maybe if you had the Donna L. Vanier Children's Center and then listed all of the agencies, but with just that much information, it just seems large to me, so.
The other thing that's not apparent from the perspective necessarily, nor from the site plan, is that we intend to back that with landscaping so that it's not a big sign setting out there like a billboard.
So you don't have a overwhelming reason that we shouldn't go more than 32 square feet then?
Other than the proportions of the logo, because, I mean, we can't stretch it out, or when, you know, there comes a point at which the lettering isn't particularly readable, and that's all we're working with. But that's not necessarily the max or the minimum sign that we can put in there. We can go to a smaller sign. It has, it's a little hard to see on the projection there, but the sign itself is an inset, and then it's surrounded by limestone with a cap on it, and it's a little curved wall. So
And it's lighted
Yes.
from
the ground.
From the ground.
From the ground.
We were looking at this and assuming that for the individual users that we didn't have any elevations to show you, but that we anticipated that there would probably be some form of wall signs, you know, to identify the individual occupiers, you know, so that a person would know which is caps and which is infant development, that one should expect that there will be wall signs.
Where they have multiple frontages, then they have the ability to put signs on.
Yes, they've got double frontages there, so.
In the perspective, for instance, in that area is the public entrance to the Infant Child Development Center, and that would have an identifier. CAPS has an entrance back in here. They also have a second program that they have a separate entrance for that's on this side, Chris's place, and then Salina Child Care is way off at the edge over here, and so they're spread across those 2 faces and would get individual identifications for them.
But you'd be able to see the Salina Child Care sign from Ash,
No, it would be visible from
Oakdale.
Oakdale.
Well, I don't know if it needs to be 32 square feet, but the 50 square foot definitely seems large to me.
I'd be certainly willing to work with the planning department in coming up with an alternate proposal for that.
Dean, 32 square feet is what's normally allowed, like for a school or church or something?
Right. And again, we get back to a little bit about, you know, just looking at the structure itself. The support structure itself, the limestone backing there is 4.5 feet by 11. You know, the actual, you know, area within here is not 4.5 feet by 11, but we're saying that if you look at this structure, it's 4.5 feet tall and it's 11 feet wide, and so that as a sign structure, that's what we'd look at for the dimensions.
Well, it's very attractive, it just,
Yes.
So let's change it. He gave you 50 trees, Sidney, come on.
which I want to commend you for.
I knew, see, he knew.
Well, we have a lot of different things we're trying to accomplish with it. Not only do we need to meet the landscaping requirements, but we have shading that we want
Sure.
to provide for
Sure.
the childcare
Right.
areas. And
Right.
also, we're not going to bring in the minimum size trees that would be allowable. We're going to bring in as large a trees as we think we
Great.
can do. The other thing the site
You
plan
might
doesn't.
win an award.
Yeah, here you
The thing
go.
that the site plan doesn't show, of course, is all the shrubs and smaller
Right.
ground cover and things that we have.
I believe when we did the platelet center that you said that you would work with planning staff on the size and to get the sign proportional to the buildings around it and the Ronald McDonald House, some things like that, and that turned out very well, I think. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I have faith this one will too,
I
so.
totally do too. Any more questions of Mr. Ediger? All right, any more questions of staff?
I just wanted to clarify one thing on page 2 of the report, to something Commissioner Soderberg had mentioned, on the ratio for parking. Wanted to clarify that 26 staff at 1 per 2 staff, the ratio is actually 1 per staff, and it's the same ratio as you would have for an elementary school or nursery school or preschool. So if you're an elementary school, the ratio is 1 parking space per faculty member. For a daycare center, it's 1 parking space per staff member. But one thing that we did, what you're dealing with here, that Mr. Ediger's done, is he's looking at gross square footages for these different uses, and what Mr. Hers did was go through the floor plan itself, and which is what we do on a project like this, you start taking out break rooms and hallways and stairwells and things like that. You start shrinking that down. Even if you took the 13 stalls at 26 staff and 1 per 2 and you made that 26 stalls at 1 per 1, there is still a cushion in here of some 14 plus spaces over what our minimum would be. So you could take that number and say 26 staff at 1 per 1 staff and make that 26, but these other numbers for caps and for the infant child development are going to reduce based on the fact that
Yeah.
we were furnished a floor plan that allows us to say, well, this is an office space, this is an office space. So when you net it all out, the number of spaces that would actually be required is less than 82, and it's so much less than 82 that if you took the 13 and doubled it, the required parking would still be under the 82. So we're correct to identify that this was a school. We don't do 1 parking
Okay.
space for every 2 faculty members. We assume they all drive.
Right.
And that it's 1 per 1. But even if you take that number and turn it into 26, we're still within that amount, because what Mr. Ediger didn't do and we did was go through and pull out areas that weren't office or habitable space. So we feel comfortable that the 82 amount covers the needs for this facility.
The other thing, while we're talking about parking, it was mentioned earlier about the basement and the public or training uses that go on there. That's operated by each of the 3 agencies, and so it's an off-peak activity. It's usually evenings when they do that, or almost always evenings, especially any sizable activity in there. So the 8 to 5 normal activity for the main floor is essentially gone by the time that they're doing the basement activities. So in that sense, it overlaps.
Any more questions of Mr. Ediger? Thank you.
Thank you.
Any discussion? I'd entertain a motion.
We have a lot of public.
Oh, I'm sorry, this is a public hearing. Would anyone from the public care to address this meeting? Approach the podium and state your name and address, please.
My name's Frank Carlson. I live at 514 Marvin. Has the issue of a storm shelter been addressed in these plans for the children?
Excellent point.
I
Well, let's find out.
The entire basement is designed as a FEMA-rated storm shelter, including the access to it and the doors, which exceeds greatly the capacity that's needed for the children on the main floor. Covers the staff, children, everybody.
Good question.
Thank you.
Yep.
Approach the podium.
My name is Ron Denault. My wife Janet and I have lived at 134 North Front for the past 32 years, so we have a lot of experience in the neighborhood. I'd like to address several issues. The intersection of Oakdale and Johnstown, the traffic counts don't show very many accidents. However, we've been walkers for a long time. We see a lot of near accidents at that intersection. We use Johnstown a lot to access our house off of Ohio Street. Many times when we're setting at the stop sign at Oakdale and Johnstown, we'll have people especially coming from the south going north, and they'll just stop because they don't know what to do. And so we're sitting there trying to motion to them that they have the right of way go, and they'll say, no, you go, and it gets kind of confusing. So in my opinion, I would like to see something done with that intersection. I think that with this development, you will have an even greater traffic flow in that immediate area. I think part of the reason why we haven't seen a lot of accidents recently is that's a really wide open intersection. Since the hospital usage of the building over there has decreased, there have been very few, if any, cars parked on that intersection, so you've got good visibility so that you can come and go. When the fence is put in for the playground area, even if it's 50% open, there's something about what happens with motion and fences that sometimes it blocks your vision, so I think that will impair vision as you're headed north on Oakdale. I would prefer to see the offset with the striping so that there's a clear line of travel, so that you don't have a head-on traffic situation.
Explain, what do you mean by offset with
Well,
striping?
Dean was... Okay, do we have a map? Do we have a map up there of the... Oh, okay. Okay, right there, if that was cut, if this was cut off, like Dan Stack, city engineer, indicated, you could have striping that just goes straight through so that it's obvious that you can follow the stripe and traffic moves smoothly. Right now there's too much of an offset to effectively stripe it to where it doesn't just hit you all of a sudden. By cutting the corner off, you would have a more gradual ease into that curve. The other thing to consider is there is a stoplight at Iron and Oakdale, so traffic does get slowed down to a certain extent by that. It doesn't get slowed down, however, when the light is green and people come barreling through, so I understand your concern about traffic. My first preference is that there be an offset there so that the drivers aren't as confused when they're coming through that intersection. But I think there might be another solution that could be considered that would be very inexpensive. I haven't noticed much confusion or many accidents at all at Ash and Oakdale, but that is because the stop signs are on the opposite corners. I mean, they're on the offsets instead of... Ash goes straight through, so there isn't any confusion. I might suggest that it might be effective too to change the stop signs from being on Johnstown to being on Oakdale. That way, what people tend to do anyway is stop. It just becomes part of the natural pattern. Then you look and go through the intersection. I think that would eliminate a lot of confusion. I don't know if Mr. Kennedy can attest to this, having to do with Oakdale School, But one of the things that does happen with kids, or with parents dropping off kids and stuff, they'll come up to that intersection of Johnstown and Oakdale. If the signage was switched, then they wouldn't have to stop there. They could just go ahead and turn on Oakdale where the stoplight is, and I think traffic would actually flow better during the high traffic times. If this were to be done, though, I would highly recommend that a stop sign be placed on Front Street, a block to the west. When you do that, you would end up with a straight thoroughfare from Ohio Street to Front Street on Johnstown, but that's at least a street, the street is straight, and there isn't any confusion. It's a possible option to solve the problem without spending very much money. Okay, the next thing I'd like to address is the parking. Dean, could we have the...
Go back to aerial?
Well, that layout right there. I worked for the city for 15 years in building services and was involved in the zoning reviews for Advanced Auto and Walgreens. And the original plan was very similar to this in terms of a parking layout. And the suggestion was made, and both owners in that case bought into the rationale that an intersection or the parking entrance that close to an intersection is dangerous. And in both the Walgreens case and the Advanced Auto situation, they agreed to delete that entrance exit. And Walgreens and Advanced Auto both have a much higher number of cars going through, and they seem to do just fine with the two entrances. In fact, in that case, because the access is restricted on Broadway, both Walgreens and Advanced Auto only have exits on one of their entrance, or one of them. Well, exits one way and entrance one way. On the other street, they have in and out both ways. They seem to do very well. I think this particular layout with the offset in the street across is going to be very confusing and has a potential for creating accidents. About 12 years ago, when B&K Pharmacy decided to do their expansion and renovation, the intersection of Iron Street and Front Street was a very high traffic accident intersection, and we convinced B&K to shut down the entrance, which was almost that close to the intersection that went onto Iron Street. The minute they closed that intersection, the traffic accident count went way down because of the amount of traffic on Iron Street, even though B&K still has the entrance onto Front Street into their parking area, which is another option. I personally, I don't think it's necessary, but it might work better to have the entrance come off of Oakdale instead of Ash Street. But here again, I just don't think that it's necessary for that size parking lot to have 3 entrance exits. I think the 2 at each end would be more than sufficient. And like I say, I've seen this work very well at Walgreens and Advanced Auto with a similar amount of traffic, parking stalls and traffic count.
But well, the traffic counts aren't the same.
Yeah, well,
but I mean,
I'm talking completely
traffic
different.
within the parking lot, not on the streets.
And
Go ahead, yeah.
again, there isn't conclusive evidence that the traffic, that the accidents, there's more of an accident problem there than at any other corner.
What do you mean?
Right now there's no accident problem at that corner.
Which corner?
Oakdale and Ash.
Well, there isn't very much traffic at all there right now.
And this won't increase much. I mean, even when the hospital was there and it was busiest, I don't think they had accidents in that area. I would completely disagree by comparing Walgreens. That's our second busiest intersection in town. I can understand why we wouldn't have that. But I also think the 2 examples you gave are 2 of the most screwed up parking lots in town. I rarely go to Walgreens or AutoZone for the very reason that their parking lots are a pain in the butt to come in and out of, trying to leave. I live up north of AutoZone, so if I want to leave, I got to drive all the way down. I could do the Jim's Chicken Shuffle and turn around, or I can go clear down to Crawford and drive around my house, or I can go back out to the parking lot and I can sit there on that intersection and wait and wait and wait and wait and wait and try to get across. I mean, hugely different traffic counts, and I wouldn't say that that's a brilliant design to a parking lot. I don't think that that side exit would have helped either one of those locations. Walgreens, you absolutely couldn't. The traffic count's far too high. I would agree with you, however, that maybe changing those stop signs around to Oakdale would be a good idea. My only concern, although I don't think it's a concern, is that traffic might back up far enough to go back out onto Iron Street at heavy traffic times of the day. But I don't even know that even on heavy traffic it would ever back up. Do you have a feeling on that, whether there's ever that much where that would hurt it? But I think that part's a great idea.
I think it's a concern, and I think we'd have to go back to Mr. Stack in terms of traffic counts to see if that's feasible. But I do think that that would solve the problem of what we have observed in terms of people hesitating or stopping, just plain stopping at that intersection because they, especially if they're unfamiliar with the area.
I agree on that. What do you think, on that? Does that seem doable?
Yeah, it's, I mean, that makes sense with the offset the way it is. Normally you would offset, or you would stop the intersection that's most confusing. Johnstown is not confusing. It's very easy to drive right through it. So that makes sense. Just there's a lot more volume of cars on Oakdale compared to Johnstown. So the other rule is you always stop the traffic where there's the least amount because you don't impact your citizens as much that way. So for all of us that drive that, I don't want to stop there. But
yeah.
Anyway.
Either, but I think you may have a good point here. Tell me this: the Johnstown traffic. How do you feel like? Is it? I mean, at school let-out times, is that pretty busy? Does that become a pretty fast-moving? I mean, this isn't something we need to look at as a four-way stop at all, is it?
I think four-way. Well, no, I don't think it needs to be a four-way.
Probably overkill.
The only concern that I have by changing the stop sign arrangement is that you might end up with more traffic headed down to the Johnstown Front Street intersection and then over to the stop sign in front of Dillon's. And that's a very difficult intersection to maneuver because of the stoplight at Oakdale and Iron. I mean, this is a suggestion. It would need to be studied, and I wouldn't want to make the situation worse. But I think it's something that could be looked at and evaluated and might be a solution. And like I said before, my personal preference is that there be an offset created, take just enough land to scoot the street over a little bit so that you can have adequate striping and everything to keep the traffic moving through there so that there isn't this hesitation or this pause like we've seen happen so many times.
Could Mr. Ettinger go to the aerial view and kind of, I know this wouldn't be an exact thing, but on this view right here, indicate where those streets or the entrances, the curb cuts, the whatever are actually coming out there.
You want to talk about?
Existing one,
Okay.
it would be about 8 feet over from it.
That's the
Wait,
that's the wrong area.
that's the wrong lot.
There you go.
There you go. Okay.
Sitting there looking at you.
That's why it didn't look right. Here is the existing curb cut, and we would move over. You can see kind of a little light spot there.
Okay.
About the edge of the driveway.
Okay, but I'm on down further on Oakdale.
There's no curb cuts there.
Yeah,
On Oakdale, we have one that's down about here.
about there. Okay.
Quite a ways from the intersection.
And the building actually, what would be the south? Where would be the south
About
edge?
in here.
Okay. Okay.
When Ron talks about the B&K or Walgreens or Advance Car Parts, the difference with this site, first of all, is in how much land area that it occupies. This is several times the area that those involve, and so the car count on the site is much less in those instances. They're also a much higher volume traffic area. This site, when it's developed, we need to remember that there are 3 agencies on there, and so having 3 access points to the site distributed at the far corners and the center of it really makes sense for how people will go to the different agencies that are in the building.
Warren, what do you think of the idea of orienting that northeast entrance there out onto Oakdale? It'd be just switching it, to be in line with the other drive, but you'd be off the busier street. It also, if you're coming around the corner and turning in there, you'd be on the good side of the street or the near the entrance side. If you were approaching it from the north, you'd have the vision coming up there. And otherwise, if you've already turned onto the street, you've gotten out of the traffic pattern on Ash.
I think I'd like to spend a little time with the city engineer discussing that, because if we take it out onto here, then we've got another situation where we're building up a bottleneck on Ash. If we go onto Ash, that's already the right-of-way street, and so we're not bogging down the intersection.
But don't they just go on down to the westmost entrance there and go in that way?
I'm sorry, what?
Well, if that traffic was coming from the east on Ash, wouldn't they go on down and go in the west entrance on Ash Street rather than turn and try to jog in that?
It depends on which part of the building they're going to. The infant child development folks, if they're on Ash Street, will either come in this entrance and park here, or they'll come in this entrance and park here. That's the entrance to the infant child development.
Okay.
CAP's entrance is here, and so their people are going to park right around this area. And then the Salina Child Care is in this portion of the building, and their people will come in and park along that area, the ones bringing kids to the building. The idea is that staff primarily parks around the perimeter and in this lot over here. So most of the people coming to the three different agencies are going to, depending on which way they're coming, are going to use any one of the three entrances to come into it.
And the peak for the children will tend to be
right
down there.
Yeah.
And is this I mean, I know this is probably a stupid question, I guess, to some degree, but is there traffic coming and going all day long, or are there more like a school or a daycare? Are there peak times when they tend to come, or is this a continuous all day long with this CAPS and some of these others?
That's a very low volume, but continuous. Like
okay.
Infant child development will have people scheduled to come in. They have 3 treatment rooms, for instance.
Okay, okay.
And so that's a low volume, but it's all day long.
All day long.
CAPS will have a few people coming and going. Mostly they go out and do trainings or contacts at other places. And then the child center, the Salina Child Care, that's peak morning and evening with very little.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's different from a school in that the parent has to actually get out of the, park the car,
correct.
get out of the car, take the child in, and, yeah, so it's a little different.
No drop
Right,
off.
it's slower,
It's
yeah.
going inside.
Would it be yet a good idea, since it's plan development, to have the architect work with city staff and just review this a little bit more based on some hearing that we've heard? It seems like everything seems right, except maybe just a little more investigation into the parking and the issues there. It's something I think engineering needs to work with rather than us try to figure it out.
Yeah, but and I would agree with that, but I hate to send him back. It's a good plan, and I don't know how much better we can come up with. I think Ron's idea of maybe changing the stop sign in its simplicity may be brilliant. I mean, it may be the smartest thing that's ever happened to that intersection, except for Stack and I, who we have to stop coming home. I mean, it could be something as simple as that could remedy all our problems, and I hate to put them off a whole heck of a lot longer. He lives in the area, so I'm going to trust his opinion as far as traffic flow a little bit over there, and it seems like it's the right idea. You could go just about any intersection in this town and see stupefied people saying an intersection. I think the smarter step would maybe make our driving tests harder in the state of Kansas. Might make a better decision overall, but that's a whole other point. But hopefully it can be done something simply. I don't want to see you guys give up more ground over there. I don't know that curve is going to be attractive or help. It seems a little weird to me when I look at that plan, and I don't like to spend money. I don't like to spend taxpayers' money, so we could send a couple guys over there with a couple of shovels and dig up some signs and stick them the other way. That sounds like a much better plan than cutting curves and changing plans and,
The other thing about putting striping through the intersection is that I don't think that you ever do that, actually run striping through an intersection to create a lane like that, because that's a signal you don't cross.
Yeah, that kind of confuses the Johnstown people a little bit too. So maybe the stop sign is the right answer. So
I guess I would ask that if we're concerned about this entrance location over here and its arrangement, I'd ask for an approval that lets us proceed, and that the condition is that we work it out to the acceptance of both the planning department and the city engineering.
Yeah, I think we need to move them along. Yeah,
I agree with
it's a big project. This isn't, Billy's building a shed out behind his house. This is.
We're not stuck on this house. This is the only solution to that.
Okay.
We're definitely open to finding something better there. If that's.
I think that's an excellent suggestion on both parties today. So.
Ron, did you have any other points?
Well, if if you could just indulge me, I don't know how far back the engineering department keeps traffic count or accident count information, but the proposed configuration there is very identical to what B&K Pharmacy used to be, and the traffic count there was really high, or the accident count.
Yeah.
The minute we got rid of the entrance off of Iron, even though they left the one on Front Street, the accident count went way down.
Yeah.
So
Check. We can check on that, because we have records of the early 90s, so that would for sure cover that area.
You mean a second entrance?
well,
Because there is an entrance off of Iron.
right here,
At B&K, I mean.
could we go to the B&K?
Yeah, we can probably shovel over there to it, can't we?
It's just a few blocks away.
I think right there, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay, it's right here.
Uh-huh.
Okay, this entrance that was right there got closed. There's still an entrance off of Front Street there.
Okay.
By closing the one on Iron Street, we had to leave the one on Front Street because that was the only way to get in and out of the parking lot effectively. But the amount of accidents on that intersection just dropped to nothing.
Yeah.
Just about, just by closing that one entrance, because of the traffic count on Iron Street. You have a similar situation with Ash. It's a very high traffic count. Turning that corner, getting them on a lower traffic count street, plus if we change the stop signs at the other intersection, you're going to have the traffic slowed down on Oakdale. So that might be
Might help.
a viable situation. But I really do think that the proposed configuration will create an increased accident count on that intersection, just from what I've seen in the
Again, I
past.
think if we leave that in the hands of Dean and Mr. Stack and Mr. Ediger to come up with a agreeable solution to all of them, I think they'll look it out.
The other concern that I had is I didn't find indicated what kind of surface the new alley section would be. Is that going to be paved, crushed rock?
Proposed to be crushed rock. You're talking about the piece going out to Ash?
Out to Ash?
That it would be crushed rock or gravel, is what the proposal was. I don't know if you can blow that up at all, John? And it may not be detailed on any plan, but that's what staff's understanding was, that it was a crushed rock alley.
The existing alley is a gravelled alley, and in working with engineering and with the fire department, the dedicated alley that we're proposing there would be gravel also, with a concrete entrance off of Ash Street. They found that acceptable.
Well, the section of alley that is being vacated is currently paved. And so we're kind of giving up some paving for crushed rock in this situation. If there was any way to get the alley paved, including the other section, not necessarily paved by this development, I am, as a property owner on that alley, am fully open to whatever tax assessment would be necessary to pay for my share, if there was any way to somehow tie paving the alley into this project. Or
Talk to your neighbors. I'm sure they're going to be all for it.
Unfortunately, and I'd like to take a minute to just make this comment, the parking on Johnstown Towers didn't exist until about, they had their parking lots on private property that went to the street, but the actual parking on the alley didn't exist until about 15 years ago. The city does not have any type of an ordinance that requires a business to get a permit to put parking in, so they put a whole bunch of pavement along the alley, and so the alley has a very high traffic count because of Johnstown Towers. This development, it appears, won't create any additional traffic, but the amount of dust in our neighborhood because of the sheer volume of traffic going up and down that alley is very distasteful, and if there was any way to get everything paved, I'd very much appreciate it. And I don't know if the developers for this project would be open to participating in the cost in their section, but I'm very much in favor of sanding my part of it.
Thank you.
It's good. Yeah, good to know.
Then the other question I have is what is going to be done? It's, okay, it says future parking in that lot on the other side of the alley.
Yes. Option.
Optional, yeah.
Optional future parking, okay. So there's no plan at this point in terms of how that would be accessed or that future parking area?
Mr. Edgar?
Be glad to address that. The goal for that piece of property is to use it for a landscaped area and probably some gardens, vegetable gardens that the child care area can use. At the time that we labeled that, we had not gone through all the parking analysis with the planning department, and if it turned out that we thought that we needed additional parking, we would make a connection across the alley and put some parking in there. That's not our first preference because we think we've accomplished the parking that we need to have, and we'd rather have that as a landscaped area and a vegetable garden and some activities like that in support of the child care area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Anyone else care to address this application? Okay.
I would just add one comment, and it's also for the benefit of Mr. Stack as well, is that the city's policy on the alley paving is that if you have a paved parking lot or parking lot that's required to be paved and you utilize a public alley as a driving aisle within that parking lot, then that section of alley has to be paved. And so prior to this child care center being there was a parking lot here and a parking lot here, and it was accessed from this alley, and the alley actually served as an aisle within that. So when the parking lots were paved, the alley was paved as part of the parking lot. If you go down Elkdale south of Iron where the dialysis center is, you'll see a paved alley there. That's because that's part of, it's an aisle that serves the parking lot. So
What about Johnstown Towers then?
Johnstown
It sounds like
Towers,
they're using the alley as
they are using the alley as a aisle for that. But as Mr. Deneau correctly observed, they did it surreptitiously without talking to anybody, and you don't need a permit to put concrete flat work on your property. So basically that was done at a point in time when nobody realized it, but that is correct. Johnstown Towers is essentially using the alley as an aisle for their parking, but that wasn't part of their original plan, and they have enough parking in their actual lots. It's just that that alley parking is more convenient for a lot of those residents for unloading groceries and things like that, so it tends to get more use than the actual real parking.
You ready for a motion?
I am ready for a motion.
I would really, first of all, understanding the need to consider something with the pavement in the alley, that seems to be kind of a separate project from the one in front of us now, and I think that's something that the city could work with the owners in that area and address. So I'd just make a motion that we approve application PDD 10-3/3A with these two conditions, as I recall them. One is the architect's going to work with city staff on the sign size, and then the architect is also going to work with city staff on access and traffic flow in that area.
Would that include these stop signs that Ron discussed? Yeah.
When I put traffic flow, I was meaning whatever seems to be right after city engineering looks at it.
Yeah, and I would second that.
Okay, there's been a motion to approve application PDD 10-3/3A with instructions that the architect work with the staff regarding signage and traffic flow in that area. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None being heard, motion carries. At this time, I'm going to excuse myself and turn the meeting over to the Vice Chair, Mr. Mike Ritter.
There he is. There he is.
Do you need help? Yeah,
We're in trouble now.
leader.
Okay, I guess we're ready for item number 2. Actually, number 3.
Three, yep.
You'll have to excuse me. I hope I pronounce this correctly. Application Z10-9 filed by David LaCure requesting a change in zoning district classification from RS to I-2 to allow construction of a commercial storage building. The subject property is an unplatted triangle tract of land located on the north side of Grand Avenue, east of the Dry Creek Channel, and is addressed as 914 West Grand Avenue. Dean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. This is what I would describe as a orphan or leftover piece of ground that was left over as a result of a reconfiguration or realignment of West Dry Creek, and its current zoning is, I won't say it's a historical accident, but there wasn't a conscious decision that this was residential suburban property from a land use standpoint. It was the fact that in the city of Salina, property that comes into the city that's not platted is generally assigned either an A1 or RS zoning designation as a holding zone until such time as the property is platted and is zoned for whatever development might occur there. So this property is a result of a project in the 1930s that realigned the West Dry Creek Channel. We're dealing, John's moving on me, okay. This triangle here, the channel actually used to meander through there and actually went right through here and was a meandering channel, and basically as part of the realignment for the Broadway bypass, basically a straight channel was run through here. This channel right here was abandoned, and this piece was created that is that shape because of the new channel along the west side. The property was annexed in 1958. It's been zoned this way, and there's no record of any development or use of the property occurring during that time. The applicant purchased it in 1985, and again, there's no record even since 1985 of any development activity occurring on the lot. The applicant recently met with city staff about plans for constructing a 36 by 60 Morton building for storing and working on hobby cars. And the first district that allows this type of freestanding storage building or workshop is C5, and I2 was selected or identified as, if you look at the surrounding development pattern, the everything on this area here on the north side of Broadway, north side of Grand, all through here is I2. And since I2 allowed what the applicant was proposing to do, and it was consistent with the zoning of the Casa Loma Manor addition, which is all to the northeast there, that made sense. I think the part that we wanted to emphasize that would require a little bit of thought or creativity here is that if you're familiar with the recent application we had that involved the Moose Lodge, it was also in the same boat. It was a kind of an orphan piece that was brought into the city in an existing state, and it was zoned RS because it was never platted for development. And so you considered a rezoning request to more correctly zone that to a C5, in that case Plan C5 designation, and as part of that a plat was done establishing the boundaries of the Moose Lodge property and street right-of-ways. So this is essentially in the same boat, except the difference is this is coming before you today with a request to rezone, but it's not accompanied by a plat. And there's not been a formal request to waive the platting requirement, but we're just pointing out we don't have a plat or plat application as a companion item here. I think part of the reasoning, and the applicant can speak to that, of not submitting a plat is that they didn't want to go to that trouble or the expense if there wasn't a possibility of this being zoned to a different category. So it's not clear at this point that we're requesting a waiver from the platting requirement altogether, but it may be more a case of a deferral of the plating based on what decision you come up with. So on the one hand, the boundaries of this tract are pretty fixed. You've got the east line of the Dry Creek Channel right-of-way, the north line of Grand, and the west boundary of the Casa Loma addition. So the benefits of pinning down boundaries through a plat are not that strong a justification, but the flip side of that is that we do have a platting requirement for unplatted ground. So if a waiver is considered or granted, then you'll need to look at what findings or justification supports that, so it doesn't become a standard for future cases. But I think if you've looked at the area or driven the area, it is not a residential area. It's predominantly commercial with some industrial. There is not a strong indicator of suitability for residential development and use, and we do not have sewer service in the immediate vicinity, so a cold storage type building that would not have restrooms or plumbing is probably a good use of this property. We do have a floodplain associated with West Dry Creek here, but if we do a cold storage type building with overhead door, that doesn't need to be elevated. So the real question for you is whether this property should continue to be limited to residential use or whether it's more suitable for some other form of commercial or industrial development. So in looking at your options here, you could recommend approval of I-2 zoning as requested with a recommendation that the platting requirement be waived for this particular case or property. You could postpone consideration of this rezoning request to allow the applicant to prepare and submit a plat, or you could recommend approval of a lesser change if you thought for some reason that C5 or C6, which would allow the construction of this type of building, was a better fit. That would be an option, or you could deny the request altogether. There's probably a fifth option in there somewhere, which would be to recommend approval but allow the plat submittal to be deferred. Our point that we tried to make is that in order to obtain a building permit to build a building, a boundary survey of this property would need to be submitted, and it's not much of a step to go from a boundary survey to a single lot plat. So we were seeing this as somewhat comparable with the Moose Lodge situation, where we went from RS to Plan C5 with a plat, and so we'll let you be the judge of the importance of platting, but we did want to point out that a waiver of the platting requirement would merit distinguishing this from the Moose Lodge or other types of cases. This is a relatively small lot, and building a storage building is not major development either, but nonetheless there are some reasons for tying the intensification of zoning to a plat. So with that, I'll answer any questions you have about the area or the request.
Any questions, Dean? Would the applicant like to address? Yes. State your name.
Sorry, I was going to ask one quick question. I just want to make sure nobody else was. Dean, I'm just curious, and maybe the applicant can answer it for me. Just kind of what my eyesight is not that great as to what is in there now. Are there buildings there now, or is it just piles of trash?
There are 2 buildings in there, and there's there are existing buildings, and there's actually there's a third storage deal there, but it was something that was left there from a previous owner.
Yeah.
It's a small. It looked like it was a travel trailer at one time.
Oh, okay.
It's just been abandoned there. And
Do you intend to just move those out of there and put your new building up?
Not the 2 buildings.
Oh, you're going to keep the 2 of them?
But
Okay.
probably I would end up cleaning up
Okay.
a lot, and I would end up probably the front, the little travel trailer thing would disappear.
Go away, make
and
room
that
for
would
you.
clear up the back end of the property.
Okay.
And that would let me get my cars. I'm into British cars. Well, if you want parts for your British cars, you just don't go down to O'Reilly's or Western Auto or someplace and buy them. They're just, you don't get them. So when you find a car, you pick it up, and I need to do something with those cars. I need to be able to put them inside. I need to be able to disassemble them and clean up the good parts, dispose of the rest of them. I just, in the years past when I was collecting, I was working. I'm retired now, and it's time to do something.
Okay.
But Mr. Andrews basically said everything about I had wrote down, with the exception of one thing on my 36 by 60 building. That's what I hope to build. With the way the lot is constructed, and I need to know exactly where I can put the building with regards to the east property line. I understand I have to be a minimum of a little over 5 foot away, and that would require sheetrock, fire sheetrock on the inside of the building. So when I find out what we're going to do here today, then my next step is to get a survey, and that will be used. I will submit it as my plat, and then we'll know the exact location of my building and how far west I have to go with the building. The other thing I'm going to ask for, I don't know if it's involved here today, but I want see if we go with the I-2, the setback, I would like my setback to be equivalent to the other area. In other words, building to the east is up on the line, and that's where I'd like to build my building. So that gives me the maximum room for my 60 feet to the back, going backwards, so that it doesn't interfere with the boundary line on the east side. That doesn't push me clear to the west. Otherwise, it pushes me clear to the west to put the building. If without that, being able to put my building the same place as the other buildings in the area.
So you're not asking for a plat waiver?
No, I'm going to do the plat.
Okay.
But I'm going to do the plat. I'm going to do the survey.
Yeah.
But I want to know if we're going to change it from to tell you the truth, maybe I was young and dumb when I bought the place, but I was told it was C5 when I bought it. I never checked. I just believed whoever told me it was C5. I think the realtor probably, but I have been. I know it doesn't make any difference, but I've paid on my property tax. It says commercial property tax, and that's what I'm using it as. So I'm not going to complain about paying that. But it is. But since we've done this, it's obvious that it was never platted.
I don't, do any of us really have a problem with somebody putting up a metal building this side of town? I think the only things you probably raised some scare to Sydney when you said, get rid of these cars and these parts. I'm sure she's not going to want to see them sitting off to the side of your building anytime soon. Thank God you've got plenty of trees.
No. That's my goal, is to clean the place up.
Yeah.
That's my goal.
I think this building's only going to be an improvement to the area, so I don't think you're going to get much resistance here, but.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be glad to pay more taxes.
There you go.
Yeah, right.
Just for our own reference, do we have any idea how big the old cabinet shop that's beside it there, about what size of a building that is?
Carlson's here.
40 by 60.
40 by 60. Oh, you're the guy. Oh, that's your building?
And I've I don't know if this is going to do you any good, if you'd like to see it, but I've taken, and I know it's pretty elementary, but I've taken his building, the roof of his building, and kind of drew it on here, and it's hard to tell with the trees because you're looking at the top of the trees, not the trunk of the trees. But he's wider than I am. Let's see, it'd be like this. Actually, for you, right? So it would be. This is wider than by 4 feet than what I plan on doing, and I need to be 5 foot 1 inch off of that line, with using sheetrock for the distance that I am within 5 foot.
Close. Maybe I can pass that down through all them. We'll get it. Yeah. He's omniscient. He doesn't have to. He just knows.
That's a little bit wider than my building would be.
And then, Dean, what kind of generally is the setback on that?
Yes. I don't.
Well, we don't want to muddy the waters too much here, but we'll explain that the required setback in I-2 is 25 feet.
Oh.
However, we have the administrative authority to look at what the prevailing setback is on a block face and allow the new development to match it.
Okay.
Well, if you look at this block face, there's only one building on it.
And he's on the
there's
property
only
line?
One building
So
to match.
what he's asking for is not at all
So
out
it
of
is
line?
it's not necessarily something that involves you or any action you would take other than Mr. Carlson's here and he could know that the proposal is to match the setback. And my example that came up most recently is there was a major addition to Redeemer Lutheran Church, and on Magnolia today we would measure the setback from the center of the street and it would be 75 foot from center line, but every single structure on Magnolia from Ohio to Belmont is sitting 25 feet from Magnolia. So we looked at that and said you can match your addition for the church to the prevailing setback on Magnolia, and so the prevailing setback from here to here is 0 feet, so we would allow him to match that building. But this is an opportunity to let Mr. Carlson know that in case he has any concerns about that. But that would not be a variance process or a notification process. We simply get a building permit, we look at what the prevailing setback is on that block face, and you can match it.
Match it. Good.
Mike, I have a question. What does I-2 or C5, either one, allow in regard to disabled vehicles being stored outside? Because, and the reason for my question, you all know my feeling about salvage yards inside the city limits. Now, while you're not intending to do that, a future owner could if it's allowed.
Right.
And it's kind of an art when we talked about that in code enforcement, and I don't like to single them out, but I've worked with them, so I will. But if you take the Bankston Tire Center on North Santa Fe, they are in the business of repairing automobiles, and they're going to have automobiles in different states of repair and even inoperable vehicles and vehicles awaiting parts. They are Zone C5. They can have vehicles outside their building, but they have to be enclosed by a screening fence. So if you go by Bankston's up there, you're going to find that their storage area is enclosed by a fence. So if you have a business or a building where your business is related to the repair or body work or things of automobiles, you can have them outdoors if they're screened. But if you just have a property that happens to be zoned I-2 or C5 and there's no activity on the property that deals with automobile repair, body work, any of those, you're not allowed to have the vehicles outside. They have to be in a building.
So in this case, building a building, and then if some vehicles were stored outside that were salvaged out and you weren't needing them for a while, it would have to be in a screened area.
They would have to be a screened
And you're aware of
area. Otherwise, they'd have to be inside the building.
Right.
And could you just say your last name?
Yes. LeCure, he did a good job.
Curie?
LeCure.
LeCure, okay.
Like,
Yeah.
look, what I'm going to do after this meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not a latte.
Always tell people if they would have spelt it L-A and then C-U-R-E.
Right.
Easy.
They-
We were in front.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No, go ahead.
So we're looking at number.
This is, this is public, so if anybody has a comment, public meeting. Okay.
Frank Carlson, I own the building adjacent. My only concern in being here was that I did not want the building setting any closer to the street than what mine is, but we have addressed that issue. I have no objections if he wants to move the building a little closer to the property line. I mean, if that's something that will help him out, I have no objections to that, if that's something that we want to waive and move around with that. If he goes across the line a little bit, I'm thinking, what, $4,000 or $5,000 a year rent for...
Which is fine, yeah.
That, but, no, no, I have no objections at all with what we're talking about, and like I said, he can move it further to the east. You know, I'm in agreement with that.
Yeah, thank you. It's all going to be subject to a survey and confirming some dimensions, but
Sure.
his goal is to try to get the building put into this corner and essentially take this line and match it.
Yeah.
So it would be sitting somewhere in here, just depending on how deep it could go.
Okay.
So you ready for
But
motion?
I guess what I'm hearing, which was an option we didn't really lay out, but we did orally, which is you could recommend approval of the zoning change subject to a deferred submittal of the plat. That you could give him an indication that you support the zoning change, but not waive the plat, simply defer submittal of the plat.
Is there a motion?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it as well. We got a pattern going today.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item number 4.
Since it's a planning commission, it's not a planning commission meeting without Mrs. Denton here.
Yeah, that's right.
She'll be on this next one. Okay.
We'll just make her an honorary member, and
Yeah.
She could come back on the planning commission again.
Application Z10-8 filed by the Salina City Planning Commission requesting amendment of Article 4 General Use Regulations by amending Section 42-58-2 Bulk Regulations for accessory uses and structures to allow storage sheds 120 square feet or less in size to be located within the front yard setback area on residential corner lots. Continued from the October 19, 2010 meeting.
Would it be premature for me to make a motion on this one?
Yeah, let's just do the aye part.
I'd like to just table this for about 2 years.
Yeah.
Well, there's a motion. There's
I think I just say we say aye to this thing. And
No, I'm not agreeing, Aaron. I'm just really struggling with which looks worse, an ugly shed or an ugly fence.
Yeah.
You know, what we're trying to use, we're just struggling with trying to enhance one with the other, and I'm not sure either one of them look great. So I'm for tabling it.
So it's agony for the next commission?
Maybe so.
Well, I'm not for tabling it, but I do see there is a spelling error under number 1. You have buildings much observe. I'm sure you mean must.
oh, I'm sure I meant must, but Alyssa must have meant something different.
And on number 4, no accessory building or use shall be constructed or developed. So you're saying a building shall...
Well, what
The use
we
part.
decided to include that in the proposed, we administer that is our administrative interpretation, because by definition, an accessory building has to be accessory to something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Which is
but
fine.
but many communities, except for us, have that written into their code. So it's very what it means is, and we tell people that all the time. I cannot buy a residential, and we've had this proposed before. I can't go buy a residential lot, go out and build my garage or workshop on it, and never get around to building my house.
Right.
Exactly.
So this simply clarifies to say that no accessory building or use shall be constructed or developed prior to the construction of the principal building to which it is accessory. It just codifies that and says that's the rule of law. But this is our attempt to try to it doesn't address Mr. Kennedy's concern of whether this is worth doing at all, but it tries to address, it clarifies the need for a location permit, which must be approved by a zoning administrator prior to that occurring, so that it says even though you don't need a building permit, you do need the location permit before you place or construct anything. This provision says that even if my house sits back 40 feet from the street, I can't place a detached accessory building between the actual front building line of the principal building and the front lot line on the front door or address side. So again, we're distinguishing between the front address side and our non-address front yard. And we've also made it clear that the requirement that you have the fence and the limitations there apply equally to a double frontage lot as to a corner lot. We have indicated here, rather than according to my subjective judgment, that it be in accordance with the compatibility guidelines that we're already using for detached garages and carports. And then this was in there just to clarify that. And so this is back before you to see if we're closer to reaching a point where we've got all the bases covered in terms of items that had been expressed previously at commission meetings. So we tried to go through item by item of things we heard, and so if we look at this, since Mrs. Denton's here, we'll go ahead and walk through that. But if we turn the clock back and the Dentons came in and were wanting to put up their 110-foot structure on the non-address side, they would not need a building permit, but they would need to come into planning and show us on a site plan or survey where that building was going to go. And then we would, before they built it or placed it, we would issue a location permit so they would have some confidence that they were doing it in the right place. We would have a record of it, and no inspector's going to come by and stop and say, hey, wait a minute, what's with this building being located here? Also, if you look at the Denton's property, which is a corner lot at the corner of Brett and Colonial, and their house does set back a good distance from the front yard side, they would not be able to squeeze a small building in between the 25-foot setback line and the building line of their house. So that language there removes that as a possibility. And then they would be allowed to have their storage shed on the non-address side front yard. If it's enclosed, the yard is enclosed by a 6-foot screening fence. Building does not exceed 10 feet at the peak of the roof. And if it's more than 8 feet, then we would need to have some information about the design of it, the materials, and all, to make sure that, since it's going to extend above any screening fence, that it be compatible with the appearance of the home. And then this would not come into play at all. So this is our, and I said we're in line with Mr. Kennedy's comments. Other than not wanting to wear the Dentons into the ground, we are happy to, just keep working in this till the majority of the commission is satisfied with where we're at before we make any recommendations or anything. But this is our best efforts of what we heard in the way of comments and researching what other communities provide for, to try to address those points.
What, a question, if I may, what did we decide about that? We talked about non-conforming facilities now, and with this if this new requirement passes, what happens to the non-conforming facilities?
I thought we agreed to burn them.
Yeah, the non-conforming facilities would have the option that if they
burn buildings?
if they don't have the screening fence, they could put one up. One thing I noticed, and I don't know if they're watching our broadcasts or what, but the shed that we like to take photos of at Ellsworth in Ohio, they painted it so it matches the house now. So it was, the house was kind of a brownish color and the shed was a bright white, and now the shed is the same color as the house. We still don't have a fence there, and I don't know if you've got those photos or not, John, but if
again, please.
If that was the example,
John, do it for us.
they would still be non-conforming unless they put a fence up.
And will we require the fence?
Yes.
Okay.
So what the idea is that this, for people like the Dentons or the one I beat to death at McAdams in Ohio, they're the color of the house. they're behind a
Fence.
screening fence, they get off the list. If I've got a shed and I'm not behind a fence, or it's not even close to being resembling the house, they're still non-conforming, and then that's where we follow up on the enforcement side to say, here's your options: relocate it to a different site on the property, modify the building, put up a screening fence, but that list should be much shorter. And so if you use the Dentons or McAdams, Ohio, or other examples, by adoption of this text amendment, they become conforming instead of non-conforming, and then we still have a number of them out there that are non-conforming.
Then
Those
you got-
become enforcement items, and if you're at Ellsworth in Ohio, putting up a screening fence between you and Ohio is going to take care of that. Some other people, they may have no choice but to remove or relocate.
Shed.
But we're still, from that standpoint, we're better off, and one of the reasons that we were not maybe as aware of this as we could have been is the calls or complaints we get historically have always been about sheds that just appeared in a yard with nothing else around it. No fence, no nothing, and this shed sitting out there in a front yard with nothing around it, and neighbors call and say, can they put that there? But the ones that go up behind a screening fence just tend not to be noticed.
Did Mr. Denton, he did a little research for us, and did he mention that Lowe's and maybe some of those places, Sutherland's and some of the other places, do they readily sell over 10-foot high buildings there? I thought he was saying some of them were as high as 12 foot.
I think he went out and measured and didn't find any over 10.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, the highest one I think he found was 10, and most of them were in the neighborhood of
Okay.
8 feet.
I just wonder if we could be proactive, if there were some that were being sold over 12 foot, to go out to these Lowe's and let them know, hey, the new law has changed. And
When you're talking about those dimensions that small, it's awfully hard to get something that tall.
That tall, okay.
With the sidewalls of that height.
Okay, okay.
It's just not practical to span it with something that
Okay.
high. So.
Oh, I see what you're saying, this 120 square foot thing.
Right.
Okay, I got you,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No,
Yep.
we're if you have a big garage,
Yeah.
you're going to be
Way up there.
talking 10 by 12. You
Yeah.
can't get that much of a span on it.
So pretty much, I was just rereading that anything over 120 is going to require
Yeah,
permit.
that's
Okay.
all we're dealing with is, and all we're dealing with are the ones that don't require a permit today.
Okay.
If somebody wants to put up a 240 square foot
They're gonna need a
shed,
permit.
they're going to go before the Board of Zoning Appeals or be told no. But this window is just for the 120 or square foot or below that don't require a building permit today.
Okay.
Dean, just for my own information, accepting a text amendment and publishing it, how does that information get distributed? Do you directly inform builders?
Well, yeah, I think my guess is that this is going to fall closer into the category when we do a building code change or some of the other code changes. We have a 90-day public information period before implementation, so that when we did the stormwater erosion control ordinance, that got adopted and the language was all finalized, and then there was a 90-day period, a break-in period, before it actually went into effect. So I think if we had language finalized and a recommendation and we actually had a text change, we'd probably have a 90-day period where we'd try to get information out to Lowe's, Sutherland's, places like that in the form of a brochure, and to Home Builders Association, realtors, things of that nature, to educate them on it, and there'd be a break-in period. It wouldn't be immediate. So I think that's logically what we'll do.
Okay.
Because you'd also have, some people like the Dentons are well aware of the enforcement process, and others would be completely caught off guard to get a notice or letter that says, we've observed that you have placed a shed in your front yard at such and such a corner. So I believe if we got something finalized and the language adopted, there'd be like a 90-day period of public education before it went to any kind of enforcement.
Any other questions, Dean?
Well, the only thing I would add would be trees, but you wouldn't go for that.
Yeah, it must be a tree accompanied with every new
I'm
shed.
ready to make,
Rather have the trees than the fence.
Ms. Dent, do you have any comments? Okay.
She's just happy it's over.
It's not over yet.
Well, it's closer. Yeah.
What you're doing is making a recommendation
Yeah.
to the city commission, and they haven't got to spend near as much.
Yeah, they don't want to open this can of worms. Trust me. I'll let them know. Yeah.
So,
So the
we'll have to
motion-
educate them.
Yeah.
If
Just to
this
approve.
language that you see in 1 through 4, other than the word much,
Yeah.
changed to must, if you are comfortable with that you would recommend that section 4258 be amended to reflect these changes.
so moved.
Second.
it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, no.
Just him, not
One
me.
opposed?
I'm opposed, yes.
One opposed. Got that.
So we have a 5-to-1 vote in favor, and the only packet that the Dentons will get next is if we have a city commission packet to put together. We'll keep them informed. But
Other matters?
other matters, we will meet on the 16th, and we've got some cleanup items to bring back to you. We don't think it'll be a long meeting, but we don't want to have any public hearing items that are going to involve a lot of the public, but we just have some cleanup items there. And then for the 7th of December, Mr. Richardson, who's doing the market aid thing, he was kind of testing the water with his apartments there, and now he's thinking about going full bore to convert the whole thing to residential. So we'll be bringing back, it would simply be an amendment to that conditional use permit that we initially kind of capped or phased in the mix of uses, but now he's looking at going exclusively residential. So that would be a amendment of that conditional use permit, but that would occur in December. And I guess the only other thing is I was out at near Magnolia and I-135, and everything was flat, and the next thing you know, you've got sidewalls up
Right.
everywhere. So you can they brought in basically like concrete tilt-up panels on trucks and basically trucked them in, and then just put the walls up in place. But from our standpoint, on the Kohl's store, they went in and did the floor first and got everything established, then went vertical. On Menards, they're actually going vertical first, and then they're going to come back and do the floor. And so just prior to this meeting, I issued a permit for a temporary concrete batch plant that they're going to set up on the Menards site to actually manufacture concrete on site, because the size of that building with the floor and with the aprons and things around it, they are going to need a lot of concrete.
The rumor is that the front lots have already been leased. Have you heard anything?
I'm not aware of anything there. There's been some talk about speculation for different users, but I mean there's an outlot between Menards and Magnolia, and then there's an outlot between there and the interstate, and as people see what's happening out there, you would expect interest to peak a little bit, because now they know Menards is real.
Dean, I have a question that was posed to me by one of the patrons or one of the citizens in that area, and I couldn't recall, so I said I would ask at the commission meeting. What's the intention or city's plan for the street that runs now directly west of Menards and actually ends just near the south corner of where the Menards lot is? What's the plan on farther south headed towards
the master plan, that's called Virginia Drive, because it's supposed to tie in with Virginia Drive that extends north from Schilling.
Is that
so that
okay?
The alignment is not fixed, and the only difference, it's probably inevitable, but the difference being is that when that home site that's north of Hollybrook there was owned by Darrell Hills, he was all supportive of that and was happy to dedicate right away for that future alignment in advance, to get it pinned down and everyone know it would happen. And the owner that purchased that from him was less interested in that. So basically, we planned it as far as we could, and the alignment of the utilities was done to preserve flexibility for where that street would go. But in some form or another, we would anticipate that Virginia Drive from Magnolia to Virginia Drive at Schilling would be a connection.
And I might share that this particular person that talked to me was not excited about that concept.
Yeah.
I just want to share that now.
But that has been, I mean, it's been pretty much since 1998, that's been the plan or the concept, and it's been presented in different formats. The only difference is that before, when Mr. Hills owned it, he wanted to dedicate right away in advance, and we were going to put the utilities right in the future street alignment. And since the street alignment is not as certain right now, separate easements were obtained for the utilities. But there's water and sewer that was put through all the way down to Hollybrook to allow that eventually to develop. But the rationale for that, even though if you, I guess, live on Virginia Drive, south of there, it wouldn't be ideal, but there's no, between 9th Street and Centennial, there's no connection between Schilling and Magnolia. And that's really the only opportunity to get any kind of connection
over there
between the two and allow people in that neighborhood to get up to Magnolia or to get up to commercial services. So
anything else?
That's all we have for you this evening.
We're adjourned. I guess Doc already thought we were. So.
Fine job, Mr. Ritter, fine job.
I doubt Darrell told
the new owner.
Yeah.
From that state.